Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Akriti Rana, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Today, I'd like to welcome you all to this session, Stronger Together, Building Solidarity in the South. This year has been challenging for many LGBTQI people who live and work in the South, especially for trans and non-binary individuals. For that reason, many companies are looking for every possible way to show their support to their LGBTQI employees on a daily basis. By doubling down on their pledge to support policies and practices that promote truly inclusive workplaces, these companies reinforce their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and year-round allyship. In this unique session, we have gathered HR and DEIB leaders who work in the southern states to learn how they provide oversight and authentic support in light of numerous attacks on the LGBTQI community in their home and work states. This premier session takes attendees behind the scenes, giving them the opportunity to hear from southern leaders from a cross-section of companies and industries who each realize that we are stronger when we come together. Now I'd like to welcome Eric Day, Senior Vice President, Global Small Business, Dell Technologies, to start our panel discussion today. Eric.
Thank you. All right, raise your hand if you know what that song is. Yeah, Texas Fight. Those of you from Alabama, I'm so sorry. So sorry. And those of you that hate sports, I'm really sorry too. Everyone is welcome here. Those of you that love college football and those don't, but this is a Southern States Forum, so if you don't like football, probably not the right session. No, I'm just kidding. I hope you all are having an amazing summit. I want to welcome all of you to what I think is going to be an amazing panel. I'm so excited to bring the panelists up here in just a minute. And I want to welcome all of those who are joining us from online as well. I hope many of you all heard what I talked about yesterday on the stage, because as someone who grew up in Florida and has lived in and out of Texas for 24 years, that's how long I have been at Dell Technologies, I have only really known the South. And the last couple years, as I talked about on stage yesterday, has been really hard for me. And I think that it has a lot to do not only with the politics that are happening in our states, and we'll talk a lot about that, but it's also the media attention that we've gotten. It is also the response from who are our allies. Those of you that are not from the southern states, you are welcome here. I see you. But I think the media has done a really bad job forgetting that the South is the place that we live, and it's the place that we've learned to love. I never used to think of myself as a Texan. It's actually really hard for me to even hear those words because of what I do in all of, not only in what I do for my job, but in the advocacy work that I do for the LGBTQ plus community. And when I see what is being done to not only our community, but our allies due to whether it's the Target situation that happened, whether it is the Bud Light situation that happened, whether it's the Hobby Lobby situation that happened, the Chick-fil-A. I mean, we can go on and on, the list goes on and on, but our job as a community and the conversation we're gonna have today is about how do we figure out how to be stronger together so that we're using education and discussion and we're figuring out how to bring everybody to the table in order to have these tough discussions. Because guess what? In a lot of cases, the LGBTQ plus community that's living in these states, not only do they love their home, right, but they don't a lot of times have a choice to move somewhere else. Right? It's easy for us to sit there and be like, oh, if you don't like it, just pack your bag and get in your car and move on out. But with your family there and your life there and your friends there, and if you don't have the financial freedom to be able to make a move like that, it's very, very hard to do that. Of course, we need to build policies and we need to have the conversation about what that looks like so that companies do stand up and support people that do want to move out of unwelcoming places. But the other part of the conversation we have to have is how do we make and how do we work together to make these states safer and more welcoming to the LGBTQ community, their allies, and the families of LGBTQ plus children, which is another big part of this conversation. And I think we're going to try to unpack all of that today. And we're so incredibly excited to have each and every one of you. Now listen, I know that it's 3:30 in the afternoon and it's this session in between you and probably happy hour and before we go to the park. And I know it's dark in here, so please stay awake. There was some Red Bull out there. I hope you all drank some. But anyway, I'd like to bring up my esteemed group of panelists up here. I will go ahead and I would think we're going to put up the card up behind me, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So panelists, come on up and let's have a really good conversation about the South. Thank you, Brittany. Thanks. Let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I mean, we've got some aviation up here, we've got some banking up here, we've got technology up here. I'm excited. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Franklin. We'll move down the row. If you can just talk about who you are. By the way, my name again is Eric Day. I use he, him pronouns, Dell Technologies, and board chair of Out and Equal. Franklin?
Hi, my name is Franklin Ortiz. I'm the head of finance for Airbus Services. My pronouns are he, him. I've been with Airbus for the last 6 years, mainly in their finance department, but also leading their Pride group. We started that organization in 2018, a lot later than other companies, and we are young in our D&I journey, but learning quite a bit. And Airbus calls our US home the American South, so we're super excited to be here and talking about this topic that is very close to us.
And tell the audience, where are most of your planes in the United States made?
In Mobile, Alabama.
Mobile, Alabama. Yeah. Very good.
Hopefully I said it with the proper accent. Huh?
Mobile. Monique.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Monique Evans. So September 6th, 2003, I relocated from Cincinnati, Ohio to Dallas, Texas. Wild, right? I had never even thought about Dallas, let alone Texas. A friend suggested it. I was looking for a change, and I got lucky. Things worked out for me. I moved from one finance city to another, unbeknownst to me. And so essentially, over the last 20 years, I have been in finance, but more recently, over the last decade, I have operated in a hybrid capacity, working in commercial finance, and then also as a leader within the DE&I space pertaining to ERG. My pronouns are she, her. I am an out trans woman. I transitioned back in 2006, and I'm happy to be here.
Sam?
Mr. Day. Hi, my name is Sam Slate. My pronouns are he, him, his. I work for Dell Technologies. I'm in our product group in a product marketing role, and I have the distinct privilege to lead our Pride pillar of community impact and advocacy, and am a founding member of our trans task force.
Thanks, Sam. All right. Brittany, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Rice. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a belonging, equity, and impact specialist at UKG, where I have the absolute privilege of providing operational guidance to all of our 9 employee resource groups, as well as overseeing our ERG management platform and working very closely with a lot of our partners, such as Out and Equal. I am born and raised in Belleville, Illinois. However, I attended college and now reside in Atlanta, Georgia with my spouse and our fur babies.
Oh, Atlanta. Lots of hot Atlanta people in the room today. All right, let's get started. You all are very distinguished and very visible LGBTQI plus community leaders and allies in your company. And, you know, it's a journey for all of us to do this work. And so what I'd like to ask all of you, and we can just go down the line, we can start with you, Franklin, and move down, but I wanted to kind of ask you about your journey. Like, when did you decide that you couldn't be an observer anymore? When did you decide that you needed to take a more active role in doing this leadership work in order to continue to help progress at your companies? Franklin?
Yeah, definitely. You know, my journey supporting ERGs and D&I initiatives started at Airbus. After I joined, I was working before Airbus, I was working at a defense company that was heavily based in the Middle East and in Latin America. And in that environment, I could not be out. Also, I had, before starting there, I went to Mormon University in Utah, which I know, you know, that environment definitely I could not come out. And by the time I joined Airbus, I had been with my now husband for 8 years. And within the first few weeks of joining Airbus, I met this guy that was starting an LGBTQ group. And that moment, I was like, should I come out? Should I not come out? And I went to his office. He explained to me what they were trying to do. It was the first ERG that was gonna be launched at Airbus. And I decided to go to their meeting, the first meeting. And it was the first time at the workplace that I felt seen, that I felt like there was not gonna be any judgment, but also that I had a group that would protect me by being out. And if you fast forward a few months after that, because going to the first meeting and just being a member of your ERG doesn't, you know, do it. You have to make sure that you know that you have challenges that you need to overcome. And the first challenge that we undertook was taking a look at the benefits and what disparities there were. And when I found out the disparities that we had in benefits at Airbus and applied my knowledge, my technical knowledge in finance, et cetera, that's what gave me that energy and say, you know what, I can speak on behalf of our employees. I can speak on the issues that we have in terms of the benefits. And that really fueled my energy to become more outspoken, to talk to our leadership about what are the things that we needed to do in order to get, well, at this point we were doing the HRCCEI, get 100% on the HRCCEI. And the conversations were back and forth and okay, it's 80 acceptable, it's 85 acceptable. I'm like, nope, it's 100 or nothing, we're not doing it. So when I felt supported by those leaders, when I felt supported by the other ERG members, that's when I said, okay, no longer am I gonna be quiet, I'm not gonna be in the closet. And from that day on, I feel like I have to come out every single week, which is great because you create safe spaces and also you allow for employees to see themselves reflected in others.
That. Thank you very much. Thanks, Franklin. Monique, when did you decide that you could not stay in the corner anymore and you had to become more involved?
I didn't have a choice. Life is difficult when people try to box you into their definitions of who you are or whatever is palatable for them regarding you. And so in my situation, and I won't hold you too long, but because that's a whole nother discussion, but again, I've been in finance for 20 plus years. And what that means for me is I started off in Cincinnati, and I remember working at Fifth Third Bank and, on my off time, hanging out with my girlfriends who were living a different life, right? Survival work. And I never quite understood, and this was before transition for me. And I never felt necessarily that I identified with, being a gay man or honestly never even necessarily a woman, right? Because one of the things about my journey that I really don't talk about is the fact that I have always felt othered in many aspects of a multitude of categories and things or whatever. I think that what helped me out in my journey has been the evolution of terminology as well as my own evolution of thought. And so me coming out was really, I would say, I guess a radical move, but more so just fighting against, the stereotypes. Again, many of my friends were survival workers, and I didn't want to be stereotyped like that. And more importantly, I wanted to be an example to them and many other of our siblings that you can be whatever you decide to be in this world and still be successful, whatever that looks like. And if, survival work is your, no, I'm not even gonna say it's your choice. Because I feel like a lot of people just feel marginalized to the point where they feel like that's their only option. But nonetheless, it's like, I fought so many journeys just to, on the one hand, kind of prove a point and go against stereotypes, but then when I got to the point where it's just like, no, I love myself enough regardless of how people receive me, that was enough. And with the evolution of language and terminology, now recognizing that, non-binary is a thing, and it's always been a thing, but I'm old enough to remember that many of us moved and operated in a way that we couldn't quite put a title or understand what it was that we were and how we could fit into the world. So around 2006, right after I left Chase, is when I officially transitioned. And it seemed like it was a whirlwind thing, but honestly, it took time, and it was layered. And in terms of the work and advocacy, it was when I started at GE Capital, and my manager supported me to be a part of a conference. I said, hey, this seems interesting. Can I get funding? I don't even know why I asked for that. Like, it was just amazing. Like, I asked for it, and he's like, yeah, that's cool. And he was so supportive. And so we got acquired by Wells Fargo, and the blessing for me, and again, I tell people how lucky I am, because things just worked out in a way that it wasn't intentional. I didn't start getting intentional until like the last 7 to 10 years. And so when we got acquired by Wells Fargo, they had already structures in place of protection and ways to be active internally and externally on behalf of the organization. And so it's worked out for me. It's better to be out than in.
I love that. Yeah. That's right. Love that. Sam?
There's a phrase, a turn of phrase of like, be the change you want to see. And I think that's really applicable to my journey, my leadership journey, specifically with respect to DEIB work. The two main turning points. The first being that I transitioned at Dell. I started my transition in July of 2016. I came out at Dell to my then leader in February 2017. And his response to me was like, wow, that's fantastic. What planet am I living on? Right? That was not what I expected to hear. I was braced for anything other than that. And when he's like, great, I've never done this before, pretty sure there's a process, go meet with HR. I went and met with HR, I sat down with HR, and I'm like, I'm transitioning, and he was like, I was like, well, this is not going well. Where are you going?
Such a Southern thing to say.
I know, right? I was like, straight to hell? Is that what we're talking about? I don't know. And he's like, well, you're transitioning, you're leaving. What company are you going to? I'm like, oh, God, no, I'm transgender. And he's like, oh, thank goodness, that's amazing. And that was just mind-blowing, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience to come into Joy. And we talk about coming out, but we also come into. And I came into Joy, and I came into love, and I came into a safe space. I came into a pride family that really put their arms around me. And also I came into a space where I didn't see any other out trans folk. Part of that is like Dell is large, and we're diverse in geography, and our trans and non-binary and gender expansive team members are scattered to the winds, and I had not yet been able to put my hands out there and find my siblings. So that was part of coming into my leadership, was being out and loud and vocal enough that I could be seen so others could reach out and we could connect. And the second part of that leadership journey was when the trans troop ban was announced. I'm a veteran, and wow, like that, I think you were on speed dial then. I think I was either texting you or calling you or sending you an email like that minute. I was sitting in the cafe at one of our Palmer Lane locations, and that was it. I was done sitting on the sidelines. And anybody who I could get on the phone and email, whatever, like, you're not doing this. And frankly, it was the least I could do, right? I wasn't having to worry about being separated, losing my retirement, losing everything that I'd built in my military career like some others were. And I think that's when I started talking about needing a trans task force. And I just talked about it until we were standing it out in Equal, and Eric was like, we have a trans task force. And I was like, yes, we've got it now, right? Like you say it until it comes into existence. And that was, I connected with the leadership of our veterans ERG and said, hey, if y'all are out recruiting veterans, can we have a conversation about letting them know that Dell is a safe and inclusive place where they can land if they get separated. And we'll pull a little bit more on that intersectionality thread as we get into the rest of the conversation today.
Thanks, Sam. Brittany.
Yeah, for me, I think my experience and my call to this leadership starts back in my journey at my HBCU alma mater, Spelman College, which was where I, thank you, first felt a sense of community and being immersed somewhere where others looked like me. I was able to share similar experiences and just exhale and feel like I was finally home. And so being in that environment, diversity is not only encouraged, but it's celebrated. And I started to realize the importance and the requirement of having a space where one can truly be themselves, and that shouldn't be a privilege, but a right. And so I can't say there's a single moment in time where I felt that call, but witnessing the injustices and the discrimination and the missed opportunities for the LGBTQ plus community angered me. And at Spelman, they say it's your choice to change the world. And while I was there, that felt so heavy. What am I going to do to go out and change the world? But it naturally happened that I wanted to make this work my way of changing the world. And so in my journey, there has been a lot of advocating for inclusion, as well as promoting diversity and inclusion within my line of work. And with that experience, I think that has just helped me to give me my voice as my ally, to speak up, but never speak over the community, and be there as a strong ally. And so in my role, in my current position now at UKG, I have a privilege, but also responsibility to make sure that I'm creating that same community and that same safe space that I felt once upon a time in my life within our workplace.
Well, we really thank you for your allyship. Thank you very much. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I have realized as I've grown my career as an out gay man is that my sexuality is hidden, right? What mostly people see on a daily basis, especially in the South at a Texas-based company, is at the end of the day, I'm a white man. And that gives me a lot of privilege. And I need to remind myself to remind myself of that and to humble myself when I'm having these conversations. And my question, Monique, is to you. You just talked and were very open and vulnerable to this entire audience about your many identities. And I wanted to ask you around, you know, what certain aspects of your identity impact other aspects of your identity? And has there been anything, because you actually even said something in your opening remarks about privilege as well, and you've almost kind of come into this idea of privilege on your own, and if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be great as well.
Oh yeah, I stumbled into privilege. Fortunate to grow up in the environment that I grew up in, you know, loving family. We might not have been rich, you know, but we were rich in love. I was rich in support. So regardless of whatever the world demonstrated or how the world had received me, has received me, receives me now, I know the family that I come from on both sides, my mom and my dad's side, and I know how loved I am and supported I am, and more importantly, what they've poured into me so that I love myself. Identities that, one identity that impacts another identity or whatever, it all works in tandem, especially at this place and time in my life now, at this big grown age where I am. It's so amazing, like, you know, when I was younger and I would hear certain things about hitting milestones in your life, you know, they say wisdom comes with age. And what that looks like is, it may be different for each person, but for me, it's been a lot of clarity. And more so, not just where I am now, but being able to reflect on certain things that have transpired. And more importantly, what I really enjoyed was Dina and Teresita earlier today when they asked us to think about, you know, storytelling. And I realized in that moment, and there's been many moments, where there's so many aspects of my life that either I have purposely forgotten about or through trauma have just like packed it away. So I'm still working through that. I actually just started seeing a therapist this year. Yeah. So to your question, each identity works in tandem with all identities. And I'm at a place in life where like I move and operate differently at this big grown age, at this capacity within my career or whatever. And more importantly, I just don't give a shit.
Here's to that. That's privilege right there.
That's privilege.
That's privilege.
Yeah.
That is privilege. You know, it's really interesting because I think it's really important because I want to bring it back to that this is a Southern states kind of conversation. The other privilege you had is that love that you got from your family. And I think that is, now I'm not saying that love is not, in family is not present in the Midwest or in the Northeast or in, you know, in the Pacific Northwest or in California, but it is family value and family love is really rooted in the South. And it is really nice to hear someone coming almost from a place of privilege because of the love and the support that they've gotten from their family and the strength that you got from that. And I think that's really beautiful. And I just wanted to really say thank you for
Yeah, and
for
then
bringing
there's
that
also
up.
the duality. You know, my family is very faith-based, especially on my mom's side, not so much my dad's side. So there was struggle with that. It wasn't staunch, you know, it wasn't like it directly in my face, but it was there in turn, especially when I first transitioned. And again, you know, my transition had to begin with me. Before I introduced it to anybody else, I had to figure out who I was. And looking back on things, I realized that there was a point in my life where I was what one can consider to be non-binary. You know, my gender expression showed up differently every day, not only physically, but also how I thought about myself. And even to this day, I had to figure out my own freedom. And also my relationship with, you know, the God that I serve, which is not directly associated with any particular religion now, but, you know, many of us are still indoctrinated with certain beliefs and ideologies. And it's like, what do you discard and what do you hold on to? You know, and usually it's about how it makes you feel. And we hold on to the good things about how it makes you feel. So, yeah, I still love Jesus. I was raised believing that, you know, and I know that many people don't feel that same way. I had a girlfriend that was raised in the same church, and her experience was totally different than mine. She was more traumatized than I was. Even though we were under that same covering, our experience was slightly different. So what I will say is, even within love, there could be certain factors that can be a little bit challenging. So yeah, my family loves me, but we bumped heads quite a few times.
Yeah, and just a shameless plug, I'll be running the Faith CEG tomorrow from 3 to 4:30. So
I'll be there.
If you want to, a lot of people from the South love Jesus as well, and also Also, we're doing an interfaith CEG tomorrow, so if you guys are interested, anybody interested in that, would love to have you, and it's going to be a closed group of folks. So, Sam, I'm going to transition to you, and I want to talk about the future, because you, in a lot of ways, and what you said at the beginning, you are the future of this work because of the story that you told. What is the future of LGBTQIA plus people and the work that we're doing in the workplace? And how do organizations evolve in this work in embracing the LGBTQIA community?
Wow, I feel like we could be here a long time talking about that, right? I think I want to center this part of the conversation on the recent Supreme Court ruling, because that is what is driving a lot of concern around the contemporary future of DEIB work, right? And what that might mean. And for those who might not be plugged into Supreme Court decisions the way that I am, there was a case brought by SSFA against Harvard and UNC, University of North Carolina, specifically regarding their affirmative action-based admissions policies. And this Supreme Court deemed those admissions policies in violation of various federal laws, Civil Rights Act, Title VII, et cetera. We don't need to get into parsing out the details too much, right? But basically overturned and said you can't have those types of affirmative action policies. They're unconstitutional. They're unlawful. And that sent ripple effects through the community, right? Because are we now going, is that going to become a slippery slope when it comes to other Title VII policies, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging policies? Is it going to extend from public institutions to private institutions into corporations, right? And so then that question becomes really salient, because in Texas you have government elected officials talking about getting rid of DEI at universities, right? And it's not too much of a leap to think about, okay, how does that pave into corporations? And there was a really great article in the Harvard Business Review, and it talked about how to avoid becoming a calamity, a collateral effect or impact from that ruling, and the way to look at the work. And if y'all want to take notes, I would encourage you to either go find that Harvard Business Review article or to think about it in these ways. And they talked about the work being debiasing work, ambient work, and universal work. And what this means is basically ways to structure the work that aren't centered on a marginalized group, right, or a hiring policy, but to make it about truly the word that we've been using for a while now, intersectional work, right? Ambient work, the way that you go to universities to recruit, right? Those might include HBCUs, right? Those might include diverse populations at those universities. Ambient work, which is what policies you put in place for your workforce that are family-focused, right? Nursing rooms for folks to use. Family flex work time, right, to accommodate the needs of parents. And then universal work, like ERGs, right? We don't just have LGBTQIA plus ERGs, we have faith-based ERGs, we have ability-based ERGs, we have race and culture, right? And even age and veteran ERGs. These are universal, so you can't parse that out then and say, there's this has to be colorblind, and therefore, it doesn't float. And this is a really good way to think about that work. And so while we've been talking about intersectionality a lot, when we think about the future of DEIB work, framing it in intersectional ways is a way to insulate against the attacks that we're experiencing from the legislative side and even the judicial side. So I said I'd come back to kind of pulling those intersectional threads. I'm transgender, I am queer, I am Jewish, I'm a veteran, those are how many ERGs right there, right? That I that apply
You
to me.
picked the right one.
I'm also a member of Women in Action at Dell. I talk about this a lot. The thing that happened to me almost instantaneously through my transition was I became a raging feminist because I had a real lived experience of what it was like to be treated as a perceived woman in the workplace, and then what it was to be treated as a perceived man in the workplace, and y'all, like it's not even close. And that's sad, and we have so much work to do around gender equity still, right? So all boats rise, and I think that's the base message of this work is intersectionality and what we can do for everyone, because when all boats rise, it has the biggest impact on those boats that are the most marginalized.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. Franklin, we're going to go to you next. As we talked about backstage, you introduced here, I purposely wanted to remind the audience that while you're based in DC, a majority of the Airbus employees work within the manufacturing area, mostly in Mobile, Alabama.
Correct.
Airbus was an amazing sponsor of our Southern States Forum in Mobile earlier this year. In your new work in running the Pride ERG at Airbus, how do you think about your Southern States initiatives? How do you think about using your ERG to be able to talk through some of these things that are impacting the community? And it goes across, to Sam's point, it goes across a lot of different things, right? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the overturning of Roe v. Wade happened in Mississippi. So you've got these states that are driving a lot of this change to our employees. How are you handling those conversations within your ERG?
Yeah, it's a really difficult position to be in, because when we think of companies, we always want companies to be outspoken and be out there. But what I always remind people of is that also companies are there for profit. Luckily at Airbus, they do have, as part of our sustainability efforts, they really put a big weight on human rights. And we see LGBTQ rights as human rights. And that's a pillar of Airbus. And the way that we work in developing strategies is that we have two main sections. We have an internal strategy and an external strategy. At the beginning of Summit, I don't remember if it was you or somebody talked about the inflection point that we're experiencing here in the United States. Yes, we see all these anti-LGBTQ laws, we see all these attacks on our community, but when a company recognizes that we are at an inflection point and that we as companies have that power to take us over that inflection point, that is money, right? So right now we're working on educating our leadership. We are working on creating partnerships in the southern states and in organizations across the US, because the art of partnering is what drives us forward, right? Airbus doesn't have a full knowledge on all the struggles, and we cannot go against every bill, but we know that with our partners, by joining business coalitions, by hosting events like the Southern States in the South, which thank you for joining us there, these things send a strong message to the Southern States leadership, political leaders. It helps us fight that force that is trying to shut us down. And then the next thing is, how do we do that internal strategy? And internal strategies develop really by our workers. I was talking about earlier how all of our employees, companies have top company objectives, but the foundation of companies is their employees. So how are we listening to the needs, not only on their day-to-day jobs, but also when they leave Airbus, for example, in Mobile, when they leave Airbus in Columbus, Mississippi, or in Texas, we are worried about those things. And so we create avenues for employees to come and express what their lives are like outside, what the lives of their family, of their children is outside, so that we can provide some sort of resources for them to feel safe, for them to understand that the company has them back up. And so, all these things are quite important for our strategy, and we're trying. One of the greatest things that I think companies can do is looking at your industry, right? What is the industry doing? What are other companies doing that you can adopt in order to change that?
Thanks.
I like the idea of, common sense policies. And the reality is, and I'll be candid, I'm with an organization right now where there's a lot of people in place who just don't get it. And so it forces me to think a little bit harder about, okay, how am I going to present this in a way that is a little bit more palatable, not watered down necessarily, but so that it's digestible for them based on their, lived experience or frame of reference or whatever it is that they're coming from. And it's been difficult, trust me, it is. I think that one of the things, at least from my vantage point about living in the South, or at least from my experience, is that it forces us not to be so siloed. We really have to take into consideration other people's perspectives outside of our own groups, outside of like-minded people, in order to be able to state the argument in an effective way, but more importantly, partner. It takes cross-collaboration, and sometimes, what that looks like might be a little bit different. The end result might be a little bit different than the onset idea, but, as difficult as it is, like, the reality is we're in an area of the country, and I can only speak for the South, and specifically Dallas, Texas, and more importantly, my experience. I have had to play ball in so many different ways in order to get initiatives really pushed past the mark, and it's a struggle. And what makes sense to, I would assume people in this room, doesn't always make sense to other people. And so I just want to encourage anybody out there, leaders out there, people in the ERG areas out there, whether you're getting paid for it, volunteer work, whatever. One of the things we talked about earlier was just like striking that balance, advocacy versus being an activist, And it sucks that you really have to, strike that balance, but it's necessary. And it's so many things that you may not be able to get done in this moment, but could it be fit into the strategic plan and play it out in a couple of years? Possibly. But it's all about that partnership, and it's all about that collaboration in order to figure out what's best for the organization, because at the end of the day, as my friend just alluded to, many of us work for organizations that essentially are focused on a primary thing that doesn't relate necessarily to what we're discussing. And so it's like we're blessed in the sense that we're able to enact these policies and be change makers or whatever, but there's still people in position who don't get it, won't get it, don't care to get it, and we're all going to continue this fight.
And I think it's really important to kind of take from what both of you said, because I think one of the things we have to be honest about, and I was listening to a different panel yesterday, when you work for a private or a public company, it is about the bottom line, right? It is. I know that talent is changing, and I know that for the new generation of talent, making a company money isn't what's important to them. But at the end of the day, to the company and to the shareholders, that is what's important, right? And I think it is up to us as we have these conversations that we continue to discuss as a community how to continue to talk that language. I think that's how we continue to move forward. I think we continue to be able to have that conversation with one another. And then when they see that when people can give them their full selves at work because they feel like they're respected, because they're giving what they need, it ultimately benefits both.
Yeah, and let's be clear, there's a difference between companies that are based in the South and have operations in the South.
Yeah.
I work for a company that is based in Dallas, Texas. And whatever you know about Texas or whatever you know about the South, yes, add more.
Yes. Even in Austin, don't let that fool you.
I just wanted to make a point on that too. It's also, yes, companies are for profit and all of this. And something that I always try to remember is celebrating the success and telling your leadership the impact that had on your employees. Because sometimes we achieve certain things within our organizations and we forget to say, okay, this impacted employees this way. Let's celebrate to move forward on this.
Yeah, and I think the bridge to all of this, and I'm going to come to you, Brittany, is allyship.
Yes.
It is literally the link between what we're talking about and to this other group of folks that might need to have a better understanding of where we're coming from or what we're trying to do. And Brittany, you talked about your allyship, you talked about the D&I work that you're doing at your company as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how your visibility and how your work in D&I is actually trying to build that bridge and trying to make sure that allyship is something that can actually connect the LGBTQIA+ community with this kind of conversation around the bottom line?
Absolutely. Promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and encouraging the spread of the power of allyship definitely takes a thoughtful and strategic approach, and there can be so many things to consider, but I want to highlight just a few. One being employee engagement. It all starts with listening. And so at UKG, we do an annual survey where we collect the employee engagement, their sentiments, their job satisfaction, so that we can understand where there's more work that needs to be done. And so by first listening, it helps us to get more of an understanding of what we can do. The second one is representation and leadership especially. It's very, very important that we have members of the community as well as allies in that position, because that sends a very clear message that one's identity does not stand as a barrier for achievement. And we also have a lot of different leaders that are parents of children within the community as well. So that takes that allyship to a completely different level and that understanding as well. And then lastly is community engagement, measuring the engagement that the organization has with LGBTQI+ organizations, such as here at Out and Equal, what events the organization is doing, what pride celebrations they're attending. And at Out and Equal last year, myself and a few of our Pride ERG members had the opportunity to listen to and learn more about the Gender Cool Project. And from there, we established a partnership with them. So we're leveraging one partnership that we have to continue that impact. And so when it comes to considering the landscape of the South, I think that it's important to recognize that some of these metrics may not progress as quickly as we would like them to, but incremental change still leads to an overall large impact. And when considering that, it's also important to recognize that allyship is a continued practice. You don't do one or two things and the box is checked, you're done. So by measuring these outcomes, it's not only measuring the progress and the work that's being done, but it's also showing the continued commitment towards supporting the community as well.
I love that. And again, I don't mean to sound like another shameless plug, especially since I'm on the board of directors of Gender Cool, but as we think about the trans issues that are happening right now, and when I hear about your allyship and the fact that you reached out, and it is a fantastic organization to work with to educate your company, especially companies in the South, about the misnomers of youth and trans. I mean, they are a fantastic organization, and anyone that is struggling with your company around how to address this trans youth issue and what's happening in the southern states, especially in states legislatures, please reach out to myself or Sam or Brittany around how to get involved with the Gender Cool Project. It is the most innovative way to teach your organization about trans youth and the future of trans in the workplace. So anyway, it's great, and I really appreciate you bringing that up and that allyship because they are amazing kids, and it's great to see that your company is working with them as well. So everybody knows that we prep for these things up here, and I'm going to throw you all for a loop on this last question because I think it's important. And you all talked about it, but I'm going to put it really out there because I think it's important to be transparent in these conversations. I talked to a dear friend at a very large company who I can see that all of this negative press around DE&I programs is stripping away and cutting funding from a company who has been on the forefront of DEIB for more years than all of our companies combined. Slashing, cutting programs, cutting people, it's happening. So as community members, as LGBTQI plus members and allies, how do we continue to ensure that our companies and all the companies out there continue to grow their programming and grow their people in such a really difficult time as we're having right now? I'll just start with you. We'll go down.
All right. Well, the first things that come into my mind were a couple of things that I've mentioned before. Explaining and sharing the stories of your employees and the impact that these programs have had is key to keep them alive. We have, I know that at different companies you can call it different things, but for example, at Airbus we have the ERG development program, which we select people to come in and get developed in different things. If our leadership is not seeing the benefits about it, they're not going to continue to fund that. Participation here at Out and Equal. Yes, we can send a lot of people, but if we're not going back to our companies and telling them, hey, we had this amount of people, quantifying. I know that I'm in finance and I always talk about numbers, but leadership works on that. That you have to give them numbers, you have to give them impact in order for them to continue to fund these things. And so if you go back from Out and Equal, I encourage you to get together with your ERG and quantify the effect that you had by just coming here. And then how are you going to apply those things back to the general populace of your company, right? It's about trying to see how you can help another ERG grow outside of Pride, for example, in my case. It's what are we giving back to them? And I think that's the most important thing on keeping these programs alive.
I love it. Thank you. Monique?
Yeah, quantify the effects. My thing is I reach out to leaders above me. I don't care what your title is. Understand your organization and the structure of your organization, right? And again, mine is based in Dallas. So with all the good, with all the bad, there's also a little bit good in terms of it's not so formal, if you will. So I reach out to people. I'm like, hey, can I get some time on your calendar or whatever? Can we meet? Can we talk about some things, these initiatives? And it's all about playing ball and realizing, okay, the angle with which you're playing, it has to be a little bit different going forward. And I'm just speaking about my situation, right? And so that's in the workplace. And I've faced a lot of issues within this organization. I see hope. I don't know necessarily how much of the hope that I see is going to be realized into, true effective change. Because right now it's a lot of lip service. And more importantly, with everything that's been going on regarding legislation, regarding the sentiment within this country, our budget was taken away. And so it's like, me and the other ERG leaders are like, okay, what can we do to rally up our membership and, do things on the free? Like what can we do to, keep people engaged and involved? And it may not look like some things that we've done before, and it definitely won't look like other organizations who still have the bandwidth and the budget to do all this rah-rah. One of the things for me personally, and what I exemplify in terms of leadership for my organization, for anybody who knows me, my community, I'm active outside of the job space. I'm on the board of directors for a local nonprofit in Dallas, Resource Center, which is one of the premier nonprofits in the country that services the LGBTQIA community of DFW with housing, prescription drug assistance, all kinds of things, right? So yes, we're talking about the workplace in here, but if you're really truly passionate about this work, it goes beyond the four walls of the organization that you work for that's paying you. Sometimes you gotta do free work too. Sometimes you gotta be a leader in your community as well. So figure that out. I always tell people to associate with nonprofits that are really doing the work. And then donate to, organizations like Lambda and ACLU and those that are really fighting the fight on a legal standpoint to get true justice, right? And so there's different avenues and different ways of tackling the issues that we face, and it's not just in the workplace.
Thank you, Monique. Appreciate it. I can't believe we're almost done. We're almost
know.
out of time, but
I know.
if we go a little bit late, don't leave, please. Sam, go ahead.
Relationships, 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 relationships. The relationships you build in this room, relationships you build at this summit, relationships you build across companies, the relationships you build in your company, with your leadership, cross-team leadership, cross-ERG leadership. When I hear that like budgets being cut, I mean, from an economic standpoint, are they being cut equitably across programs? Is everybody tightening their belt, right? Like that makes sense. That sounds like, okay, we all need to like figure that out and do more with less. Or do less with less, as might be appropriate. And if it does feel inequitable, then how do you change that dynamic? And, if you don't have a seat at the table, like pull up a chair, find someone who has a seat at the table and build that relationship so that you have the opportunity to tell the story of the value proposition of the work that you do, right? If there's one takeaway, I would say it's everything is relationship-based. Everything is relationship-based. Yeah.
Good point.
And I would say knowledge, of course, is power. We're empowering our employees outside of just our ERGs. We're empowering them to understand more, have challenging conversations through our unified foundational learning. We're providing the platform so that others can have those challenging conversations, as well as in our most recent sprint, learn what it means to be an ally. What's the difference between performative versus passive versus active allyship? What are the do's and don'ts, and what are the best practices? So by spreading that knowledge, I believe that definitely helps to encourage others to begin to do the work as well.
I love that. Thank you, Brittany. I'm going to close us up with trying to kind of summarize all of this and kind of a call to action. I bet you when we think about these conversations and D&I programs getting cut and all this other stuff, there's not much I can do. It's coming from the top. We all like to use that, right? Mm-hmm. So my final action to all of you in taking what everybody said on the panel today is then get the top involved. That is what we can do. Get the top involved. I'll tell you this final story, and then I want to thank the panel, but when Texas was going through the trans youth healthcare ban, which unfortunately went into law on September 1st, we are still going to fight for it and get it removed. There was actually a blacklist clause, and I really recommend anybody that's going through this in your states to look at these blacklist clause. But the blacklist clause said that any corporation that tries to circumvent the law by going to another state or blah, 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 you can lose government contracts. You can probably guess that Dell Technology has a pretty big contract with the Texas government. So what my job is as an executive, and Sam is educating me in my ear and coming to this executive, and then I go to the top. So if the top wants to make a change, I will go to the top. And I think that's what we have to drive. And I got key executives on Michael Dell's leadership team to have this conversation, because I was like, are we gonna stop? Like, are we really afraid of this? Are we really not gonna allow our parents of trans kids to be able to go out of state and get health care? And luckily enough, we had such allies on that executive team. They're going, let him go ahead, let him try. Like, government is so, like, RFPs and all this other stuff. Like, they're not going to go through all that to change all of their technology because of this game they're trying to play with it. And ultimately, our chief legal officer called their bluff. And guess what? We just announced to our ERG that, and with Aetna's help, I don't know if there's anybody from Aetna in here, but thank you for all of your support. Aetna is going to support all travel to go out of state to get trans kids their health care that they need, and we're going to support them to do it. And guess what? Let them try. I'd love them to go ahead and buy Lenovo for the Texas state government. I don't think it's going to happen. And so with that said, I want to thank all of you, Franklin, Monique, Sam, Brittany, thank you so much for your time. We will be on the side of the stage to answer any questions that you all have. Enjoy the rest of Summit. I look forward to seeing you all at Animal Kingdom tonight. It's going to be a hoot. The Avatar ride is by far one of the best rides in Disney, so I really hope to see you all there. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and we'll be on the stage. Thank you all. Thank you all so much.